Dito nagpa-request pa ako, 4. Pwede na lang po sa gitna.
awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang mag-ibig, telas ng sinakalan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyak ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagagang tutok sa simoy at sa langit mong pagaw, ay hinatang tulang awit sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nag-iindig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan ang ay di magtitinig. Lumalang araw ng walhagit pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang inigaya na pagkay mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Morning. Welcome to the fifth in our series of webinars on various selected topics related to our efforts to move forward from the pandemic and towards new horizons for the Philippines. This particular morning, rainy morning, our topic is on education, culture, sports, and the arts. And our presenter will be Dr. Prospero De Vera, our respected education expert, the chairman of the Commission on Higher Education, very good friend of the educational sector, and of course the principal developer of a number of initiatives as far as education, culture, and the arts is concerned. My name is Jonathan De La Cruz. I will be your moderator for this morning's session. Our principal reactors to Dr. De Vera's presentation will be Dr. Benjamin Chipi Espiritu, who is with us on Zoom coming from Mindoro. Dr. Espiritu was formerly the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila. He is presently the president of the NDCP Alumni Association. Has been in education for some time, and he is considered an expert in this particular field. Of course, we have our main expert in, of course, in not only in Carambola, which is our program, but in the field of arts and culture, basically. And yes, she has been in this particular sector for a long, long time. She is well on her way to becoming a doctor. Ganun ba yun, Trixie? She's taking her doctorate. A master's pa lang. Nandito na si Dr. De Vera, baka pwede nang mag-umpisa. She's well on her way to getting her master's on this particular topic. And our co-anchor, yan ang aping best dressed na anchor on radio, Attorney Trixie Cruz Angeles. And Dr. Richard Taduran, a professor of anthropology and culture in the University of the Philippines. We have our links, Zoom links. We are inviting the public to join us in this particular endeavor this morning. Napaka-importante po nito para sa ating lahat, especially since we are moving out of the pandemic. Mag-uumpisa na yung face-to-face na rin. For the past 2 years, nabalam tayo ng konti dito sa ating sitwasyon sa education dahil nga dito sa pandemic. This particular program, a webinar program, as I mentioned earlier, is being initiated by the Alliance of People's Organizations and Alliance of Progressive Organizations and firmly supported by the ALC Media Group as well as our other partners in media and the Academe, Manila Times, and the Manila Standard. Our conveners are here. Mr. Joel Paredes, who was formerly the Undersecretary of the PCOO during the time of President Estrada. Of course, Joyce Cartin, formerly the Deputy Director General of TESDA and MYC. We also have with us Mr. Eric Ines, a respected person insofar as a respected member of the NGO group alliance of progressive organizations, as well as an expert in the logistics and finance. And of course, we have members of the Maunlad na Pilipinas movement, MPM. They are here with us, Gary De La Paz and Christian Grabador. And we would like to thank the editor-in-chief of Business Mirror, respected journalist. Talagang ito, super editor ito, Chuchay Molina Fernandez. And we are also on Zoom with the other members, Mr. Rolly Estabilio, the publisher of Manila Standard, and of course, our friends from Manila Times. So, without much ado, nais na po natin umpisan ito. Napaka-importanting topic po nito. We are now inviting Dr. De Vera to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonat. I have a short presentation of several slides just to emphasize, I think, the most important points that should be talked about, no? Particularly during this election period. But let me just start by saying that my presentation is not a platform developed by CHED. This is purely my own thoughts as an educator for close to 4 decades already, as Vice President of UP before, and also my experience in CHED. No? CHED has no official position on the issues. We have not discussed it in the Commission and Bank. So these are some of my thoughts. No? So can you put the slides now? Okay. I put the title, "De Kalidad at Makabuluhang Edukasyon para kay Juan de la Cruz," and I selected 7 points that can trigger the discussions. No? These are, of course, not exclusive. There are so many issues in education. But I picked what I thought would be important, particularly during this election period. And I hope that the candidates can pick up and state their position on these issues because many of these have implications on the next administration, on whether they will pursue, improve, or forget about some of these initiatives. So the first one, can you move the slide, please? Okay, first one. No? On basic education, I think the most important issue that will face the next administration is really to do a comprehensive review of the K-12 program. This was started under the Aquino administration, implemented under the Duterte administration. And there is already enough data to start reviewing it, particularly in terms of determining whether the policy objectives of the K-12 program, which is to make sure the students are ready for university education and also can get employed, are being met. Part of this is really issues that are continuing even before K-12 but are still there, like classroom shortages, for example, learning materials, and critical resources in education to produce what we call the 21st century K-12 graduates. No? Overall, the need really is to look at how or what reforms are needed to continue to increase participation rate, gross enrollment rate, completion rate, etc. We still need to make sure that students who enter our education system are able to finish and continue with their education. The second one is part of the claim or part of the objective of the K-12 is to ensure access to quality education for all school-age learners. Aside from building more schools, we need to make sure, can you move the next slide, please? Okay, we need to make sure, for example, that efforts in the alternative learning system are continued. No? ALS has been pushed very aggressively in the Duterte administration. More and more students who were not able to finish their schooling have been able to go to ALS and go to university education. We need to focus on that. No? The third one is, if you look at this data, for example, and this is data coming from DepEd, no? For every 100 students who enter grade 1, only half or 50 finish senior high. So we need to really focus on this to increase the participation rate, the cohort survival rate for each of these. We are still behind many of our neighbors in the Asian region in terms of the survival rate of students once they enter the school system. So this is critical for the next administration. We have started by passing a law of putting together a school feeding program. The next administration must ensure the continuity of this because this has just started. Because there is empirical evidence, there's a lot of studies all over the country saying that one of the reasons that affect the participation and survival of students in basic education is really because they go to school on an empty stomach. And many of them are not able to concentrate, many of them are not able to study well, and many of them drop out because of this. No? So there is already a law. We need our candidates and our next set of leaders to ensure that the law is sufficiently implemented. Number 4, in terms of basic education, ito hindi na kailangang pag-usapan kasi every administration this is raised. No? Recognize the importance of teachers by reviewing and possibly reducing or eliminating as needed their teaching and non-teaching related functions, duties, and responsibilities, and increasing their salary and benefits. This has been a call of the teachers in every administration, and we have been able to address some of it. Some other concerns are not addressed. But basically, we really need to review not just the pre-service training of teachers or how you prepare teachers, but the in-service and the classroom involvement of teachers. It is going to be more difficult moving forward because in the post-COVID period, you will have a next set of adjustments from going from primarily online to now going to face-to-face. And you will have to seriously look into it and come up with a program of shifting back to more face-to-face in the next couple of months. Now, for higher education, clearly the most important policy concern is what do you do with free higher education. We need to continue and expand free higher education under Republic Act 10931 to improve access to quality education through several efforts. Okay? We have increased access to higher education tremendously. The problem now is we need to focus on affirmative action. We need to require all public universities to implement an affirmative action plan that will increase and track the admission and graduation of students from public schools, from poverty-stricken and hard-to-reach areas, from marginalized groups such as indigenous peoples, children of rebel returnees, decommissioned combatants. Because what is happening in higher education now is because public university is now free in terms of tuition and miscellaneous fees. There's a significant movement of enrollment towards public universities. But the number of slots are not increasing proportionally with the demand. So it is going to be problematic if we don't have an affirmative action program because those who need to access education the most may not be able to pass the admission requirements in many of our universities. We have the tertiary education subsidy in government now. 500,000 students are getting tertiary education subsidy. But we need to look and change the tertiary education subsidy to target beneficiaries from indigenous communities, children of rebel returnees and decommissioned combatants, and financially needy students from private higher education institutions. There are two types of test beneficiaries now. One is those who belong to the Listahanan 2.0 of the SWD. The other one are students who reside and study in private schools in cities and municipalities that don't have public universities. Those are the only two types of test beneficiaries. And we all know that there are many areas in the country that government is not able to reach. Upland communities, for example. We need to, the next administration has to seriously look into the DSWD listahanan system to improve it so that those who really need it can be included in the listahanan 2.0. If you look at this data, as I said earlier, historically, for every 100 students who enter grade 1, only 50 finish senior high. And the data shows that only 25 go to college. So there's the most significant drop in participation rate or cohort survival rate is from senior high to university. Free higher ed has addressed that significantly because the participation rate has now increased from about 27% to 33% over the past 3 or 4 years. So the signal that you can get free education in public universities and get additional subsidy has been loud and clear. There is a very significant increase in the number of students who are able to continue their studies. And even students who stopped studying are coming back. Even OFWs who were not able to finish their education are coming back to school. So there is a significant increase. 1.6 million students in more than 200 public universities are no longer paying tuition and miscellaneous fees. If you look at our participation rate at 33%, it is now competitive with our other ASEAN neighbors like Thailand and Malaysia. If you include TVET in the data, the participation rate in the Philippines is about 41% now. So 41 out of every 100 students who should be in higher ed are in higher education. But if you look at the graph, we're still behind Thailand and Malaysia in the region. And worse, if you look at Singapore, the participation rate in Singapore is 89. So the drop-off from grade 1 is only 11 students. 89 out of every 100 students who should be in higher education are in higher education. So we still have a long way to go in terms of providing access. We have improved, but we must increase the participation rate more. No? Continuing with higher ed, we need to review the free higher education law and institute a return service agreement. Kulang doon sa batas ito, hindi na ilagay. We are subsidizing the education of our students, but they're not giving back for the subsidy of government. So we need to institute a return service agreement so they can give back to their schools and communities. This one is not, well pushed. The ETIAP, this is the equivalent of ALS in primary and secondary education. In higher ed, we have the expanded tertiary education equivalency and accreditation system, where students who have not been able to finish their university education can go back to school and they get credited for their experience and their work. We need to aggressively push that. We also need to aggressively push distance learning. If you look at our other countries in the region, we are way behind in terms of distance learning. In many of the countries in the region, they use distance learning to provide access to university education. In India, more than 1 million students. In Indonesia, more than 1 million students are learning via distance mode. In the Philippines, we don't even have 100,000 students. It's an area that we are really so far behind. And the UP Open University and the other schools have not been able to do something significant about this. We need to look and see if we can increase the funding and the grants we are giving to students for their tertiary education subsidy, because the cost of education has increased because of flexible learning, because of COVID. There is additional money needed to purchase devices, internet access plans, internet literacy programs, etc. The next administration has to seriously look whether 40,000 per year is adequate for a student to subsidize their education. Next, this one is what I mentioned, the ETIAP program. We need to aggressively push this so that more students can go back and earn their degrees. Number 6, improve the quality and reliability of higher education. So we have improved access in higher ed, clearly. We now need to put more effort on quality and reliability. And this includes aggressive monitoring of private and public universities to ensure quality assurance for all degree programs, and close degree programs that do not comply with national standards. We also need to continue pushing for the internationalization of higher education. If you look at the next graph, there are now 15 Philippine universities ranked among the best in Asia. This is a 300% increase in terms of ranking of universities prior to the Duterte administration. CHED has been aggressively helping universities to get internationally ranked. And if you look at the list, there are universities that you have not heard of but are now ranked among the best in Asia. Cebu Technological University, Central Mindanao University. I don't know if Jonat has gone to these places. No? Central Mindanao University, of course CLSU, we know that, but there are many universities, and we expect about 3 or 4 more public universities to join to join the club this year, including Visayas State University, West Visayas State U, and possibly Mariano Marcos State University. Okay. Continuing with higher education, we all know this. We need to increase public investments in research, particularly generating new knowledge. We are adopting in the Commission a flexible learning policy where public and private universities can determine the proper mix of learning delivery systems and maximizing the use of technology in achieving learning outcomes in a disaster-resilient setting. This is going to continue. But universities must now shift accordingly to be able to maximize the use of technology. That means, better connectivity, fiber optics, better learning materials in schools that need to be put in. This one is still related to higher ed in terms of universities. We need to focus on adult education. We're not doing a lot of programs on adult education, and graduate studies scholarships for our faculty members, and increasing funding for both public and private universities to develop smart campuses. In Bayanihan 2, government allocated about 2 billion pesos to start the Smart Campus program in public universities. This year, another 2.6 billion was included. And so slowly our public universities are laying fiber optics, getting learning management systems, improving facilities. But we need to assist the small private schools. The small private schools need to be assisted by government to become smart also. And then finally, we need to promote and ensure the continuing relevance of education in the face of the rapidly changing demands upon the workforce brought by globalization, economic and social transitions, technological shifts, etc., and sports and wellness. So, as I said, it is access to quality and relevant education. We need to work. We're doing this now, and more effort should be done for this. We need to help our Filipino overseas get their credential recognized by the foreign government so they can practice their profession. This is a global problem that we have been trying to address to the best that we can. Before, many of our OFWs were not allowed to take tests in nursing, in engineering, etc., because we were operating on a K-10 program before. So if you migrate, for example, to Canada now, you are classified as a second-year university student in the number of years of schooling. We have addressed that because of the K-12 program. So now we have the same number of years for K-12. But we have a problem for the OFWs and migrants who are already in these countries but only pass through a K-12. We need to work bilaterally with the governments, CHED and their ministries, to recognize their degrees so they can take their examinations. I am sure if you allow our Filipino overseas to take the exams, they will pass it. But they are not being allowed. The two other points, we need to continue developing a seamless linkage between DepEd, TESDA, and CHED. In 1994, we separated our higher education system and trifocalized it. The thinking at that time was that the education bureaucracy was too big and cumbersome. That's why they separated DepEd, TESDA, and CHED. Other countries in the region did not trifocalize. So looking back, we need to re-examine whether that was really a correct decision and what can we do to help them work together. And finally, sports and wellness programs need to be developed, particularly to provide aspiring Filipinos a pathway to get educated and to become athletes. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat, Dr. De Vera. Before we proceed with our reactors, I'd like to advise our viewers as well as our participants on Zoom that we are live on DWIC. We are also live on Facebook and YouTube. So now is Dr. Espiritu ready? Is he on Zoom? We'll request him to make the first statement as a reaction. Wala pa. Yes. Dr. Espiritu, please. Wala pa? No, we will now request, in the meantime, at we are getting Dr. Espiritu, he is in Mindoro right now. We will request, nandiyan na. Dr. Espiritu, please,
Yeah.
your reaction.
Yes.
to,
So thank you, Ambassador Jonat, for inviting us here. Firstly, I'd like to greet and congratulate my good friend Dr. Popoy de Vera, Chairman of CHED, for everything he has done in CHED, no, and particularly leading the commission through this pandemic and helping out higher education in the midst of all of these problems. Now, my reaction, I agree with Dr. De Vera for number one, the comprehensive review of the K-12 program. I agree that we now have to review what has happened after 6 years. One of the basic things we look at in education is what should the control point be. It should be long enough to establish a trend and short enough to undertake corrective actions. So after 6 years, I think we have enough data to see if the rationale for the K-12 program is correct and if the objectives are being met. Now, the next thing that he said, he talked about looking at the participation rate, the enrollment and graduation rate. I agree to that. You see, I see it here in Mindoro that there are many who really started elementary education, but the number of those who are able to finish their high school, much less college, is really quite low. The figure given was around 50% finish high school and around 25% finish college. It may differ from area to area, but we really have to look at that to ensure that the participation rate, the enrollment rate, the graduation rate continues to go up. Now, Dr. De Vera also talked about ensuring access to quality education. Of course, it's not simply a matter of quantity. We have to have quality education because that is the only way we can make our population competitive in a globally competitive economic world environment. He talked about pushing the alternative learning system. I totally agree with that, no? And to improving and expanding the school feeding program. Because paano nga yun? Paano ka, nakakapasok ka nga, gutom ka naman. And for this, it's not simply a matter of tapping government. There are a lot of good individuals and organizations in the private sector who I believe can help here. I do that here in Oriental Mindoro. I have a feeding program for several barangays here. But this was really being undertaken more pre-pandemic when it was face-to-face. No? But kailangan po talaga ngayon. Ang ginagawa po namin ngayon, hindi na feeding program because it's not face-to-face. Hindi lang naman ho bumabalik. But we help in providing them with the tablets, PCs, and load. Critical po yun, yung load. Yes. Because you may have the gadget, but you don't have the load. And then the other item raised by Dr. De Vera was recognizing the importance of teachers by reviewing both their teaching and non-teaching function and increasing their salary and benefits. A lot has been done already for the public school teachers in the last several years. So I think what we should look at now is how we can help the teachers in the private school system, particularly the small schools. Because the reality of the matter is that the public school system alone will not be able to cope up with the huge demand of students for enrollment and quality education. So for this, well, my personal proposal is not just to give quality education, but to add and expand to the number of vouchers being given. There is assistance already being given right now by the government, but we probably will have to expand this. Of course, these schools, the private schools, must be given strict oversight by the government to ensure that the money that is given to them results in quality education for the greatest number of students. And Dr. De Vera mentioned continuing and expanding quality education in higher education. We talk of the affirmative action plan, which I totally agree with. And the additional education subsidy to target beneficiaries from IPs, children of rebel returnees or rebel returnees themselves. I agree with this totally. The return service agreement is something I think we should really push. We give free education, a considerable part of the national budget of taxpayers' money is given to students who are able to finish their education. It is, I believe, their duty to give back. So I believe totally in this return service agreement. Now, the matter of improving the quality and reliability of higher education was also brought up, particularly adult education. I again agree with this. Para nga po sa akin, education should not stop when one finishes college. There must be lifelong learning. And for this, I really will be pushing and push for lifelong retraining programs, continuing education. The world continuously changes and we have to change along with it. In fact, we have to be ahead of the curve. And this matter of smart campuses, tama po ito. This is not only tomorrow, this is already today. So we have to improve our campuses, help the small private schools, make broadband as much as possible, accessible and affordable to all. Sinisimulan na po ito. This is being done. There has been a clear movement by the present administration to do this. We must not only continue this, but we must ratchet up on this. And finally, Dr. De Vera talked about promoting and enhancing the continuing relevance of tertiary education in the face of rapidly changing demands upon a skilled workforce. I'd like to expand on this more because this has been one of my advocacy, something I have been telling everyone. I have talked about this extensively in my seminars, in my corporate governance seminars to directors of boards of banks, publicly listed companies, and insurance companies. We live in a very, very competitive world. And for Philippine Statistics Authority figures, by 2045, we will have a population of 142 million. Now, is this good or this is bad? Well, this is really the trend. And this is, as I said, Philippine Statistics Authority and Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas figures. So this will be a boon to us. It will be an asset to us because we have a large population, which means a large labor force, a large and young labor force. This will give us a large domestic market. This will give us opportunities in countries with declining populations. But this will only be a boon to us if the youth of today, who will be the workforce of tomorrow, are given the capabilities and skills that the job market of tomorrow needs. And so to be able to provide that to them, we have to start now. We have to determine what will be the needs of the future. And this is what we have to put in our educational system, from basic education to tertiary education to continuing education and beyond. That is the way to make ourselves truly competitive. I believe that education is the primary area that the next administration should focus on to make the youth and the next generation of Filipinos competitive. It is the real road to sustainable economic growth and development. But at the same time, education cannot be looked at in a vacuum. Dr. De Vera was talking of a seamless linkage between DepEd, CHED, and TESDA. I believe we should go beyond that. It must be a seamless linkage among all areas of government. It must be a whole of nation approach. It's not only government, but government and the private sector. Because education, we cannot look at education alone. The government cannot do it alone. It has to be a whole of nation approach. There are a lot of threats also that Philippine society will be facing in the future. And there's the reality of climate change. We are feeling this now. We have felt this for quite some time. This will heighten in the future. And so this is something that must be injected into the curriculum, something that everyone must recognize, be taught, and must work on to combat. The next is really, as I said, the competencies and skills that will be required by the next generation, by the future job market. We are actually in the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution, as we know, was water and steam power. The second was electric power and mass production. The third was electronics and IT for automated production. Now we are in the fourth industrial revolution, the fusion of digital, physical, and biological spheres, where we talk of artificial engineering, bioengineering, 3D printing, robotics. So many jobs will be at risk. Jobs of tellers, factory workers, adjusters, bankers, investment managers, all of this will be at risk. So the fourth industrial revolution will disrupt many traditional industries and many skills will become obsolete. Labor regulations and the workforce should be ready to take on the challenges and opportunities brought about by artificial intelligence, robotics, bioengineering, and the like. And thus, the educational system, the incoming administration should look at this and focus on this as early as now, as early really as 2022. DepEd, CHED, and TESDA are actually already doing this. But we should ratchet it up. We should do more so that we not only keep up with the curve, but we should be ahead of the curve. Then the population increase of 142 million that is projected by the PSA by 2045 will be a boon to the population. They will be the ones who will service the domestic market, service the markets of foreign nationals who live in countries with decreasing populations, with aging populations. Then that is really when we will grow. But the process really, which in As I said, we recognize it has been started not only by this administration, by past administration, but we really have to ratchet up. Kailangan po talagang mauna tayo. We know that the Filipino can. Kayang-kaya po natin. The Filipinos have the talent, have the skills, have the intelligence, and the perseverance to do that. Government must take the lead. The private sector must help. It must be a whole of government approach. Again, I would like to reiterate my position that education is the primary area the next administration should focus on to make the youth and the next generation of Filipinos truly competitive. It is the real road to sustainable economic growth and development. Thank you very much.
Can all be proud of. Part of that, of course, we were focusing basically on the what we call the hard part of the educational process, as well as the molding of the brains and hearts of every Filipino. We will, of course, request the other reactors, especially Attorney Trixie Cruz Angeles and Dr. Taduran, to provide some balance as far as the soft part of our molding of the hearts and minds of each and every Filipino, which we will request them to do after we recognize one of the reactors, Dr. Gaspar Gayuna, who is now on Zoom. We will ask him later on to make his own comments on this. But before we do that, we will request Dr. De Vera if he wants to react to Dr. Espirito's statements.
No, I'd just like to thank Dr. Chief Espirito for the very nice words. I completely agree with him, you know. If there is one thing that the Duterte administration can claim as solely its own, it is really free higher education, because it was enacted, it was implemented, and we have produced the first graduates already of free higher education in 2021, because we started in 2017. So if there's one program that is really a Duterte legacy, it is really free higher ed. No? Second, it is really, a recognition that the best investment that a country can do is invest in its young people as a philosophy of governance. You know, every peso given to free higher ed should not be seen as an expense. It should be treated as an investment in the future of the country. Because once you produce more Filipinos who are better educated, more highly trained, highly employable, then your increase in population becomes an asset. On the other hand, if you don't invest in education, then your increased population will be a burden to the country. So those are just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Maraming salamat, Dr. De Vera. Now, we will, before we ask Dr. Gaspar Gayona to make his statements in reaction to the previous presentation of Dr. De Vera, we will request Attorney Trixie Cruz Angeles, to give us the soft touch as far as the molding of our generation of young Filipinos is concerned. Thank you.
Good. Walang sound. And good morning. I don't exactly know what the soft touch is.
Culture and arts.
Okay, but culture and arts. I actually wrote an assessment of our culture and arts. I just need to look for it in my notes. Medyo nawala.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that our competitiveness will not just be limited to our ability to do the digital things, digitalization and everything else. But actually, as Dr. Espiritu and Dr. De Vera mentioned, it's a whole, the humanity that we have in order to do these things. Please remember that we have 10 million Filipinos overseas. Many of these are very, very much appreciated as far as, not only as far as skills are concerned, but their humanity as persons. They contribute a lot to building communities of love and respect for the Filipino.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk about culture and arts and its part in nation building. So creating a nation begins with national consciousness. Once aware of a history, a shared history or culture, a group of people will get a sense of community, and despite differences, identify as a whole. In our case, as a whole nation. We already are disadvantaged because we have a multicultural society, and it's hard enough having a single one. Getting awareness about a single culture, but managing a multicultural approach to nation building is certainly almost always a challenge, but not impossible. The study and awareness of our cultures, arts, and history, therefore, are essential to nation building, without which we are simply 100 million people existing in the same territory, but never really uniting towards a common goal. The ruinous competition between parties, the viciousness of elections are all expressions of individual ambitions to success, often to the detriment of public interest. Despite the importance of such awareness, however, the existence of various cultural agencies, there's a need to make a stronger push for each of us to learn more about our past and ourselves. For really, how can we love a country that we don't know? To this, we propose the National Agenda for Culture and Arts. First, the study of Philippine history has often been limited to the events of the past century that gave rise to what is now our republic. We know of the age of colonization, the heroes of the propaganda movement, and of the revolution. But of how we were, what our governments were, our practices, indeed what life was like before the arrival of the Spaniards, we learn very little unless such studies individually sought for enjoyment or for higher education. We therefore would prefer the direct increased hours of learning in high school and university devoted to the study of Philippine culture and history, including Philippine prehistory in the various ages of the country's evolution. To support this, the provisions of Republic Act 10066 or the Heritage Act of 2009 mandating the creation of heritage registries in local government units will henceforth be encouraged and enforced for the continuing education of communities as well as the promotion of local tourism. We likewise suggest the revival of local culture and arts councils and the use of the by now increased share in the internal revenue allotment for related projects and activities, including but not limited to the documentation and conservation of local heritage. Further to this, the People's Television Network should be encouraged to show more programs devoted to heritage, history, and the arts, including but not limited to the performance of the works of national artists and noted artists, travelogues, shows, and series on prehistory, historical figures, and the like, much of which can be already sourced from the archives of cultural agencies, notably the CCP and the NCCA. Increased scholarship in Philippine prehistory and history should be encouraged to the funding of research papers and books, grants from which shall be sourced from the existing National Endowment Fund for Culture and Arts administered by the NCCA. If you will take note, I'm not encouraging even new budgetary allocations. A lot of the budget is already justified or can already be sourced. The NCCA by itself has two sources. There's two endowment funds, one for heritage and one for culture, generally for culture and the arts. The National Museum also has two endowment funds. And these are primarily directed by the cultural agencies. A greater availability for these for local communities a new policy should be created for greater availability to local communities of these endowment funds. The other thing that is of note that seems to always be the elephant in the room when it comes to national policy on the arts is that we've rarely acknowledged the musicality, the innate musicality of the Filipino. Despite the lack of government support, the Pinoy shines in every corner of the globe, be it a band in Singapore or exploding on a Broadway stage. It's time for us to get involved. The Swedish model is one of note. Music education is considered a right in Sweden and is mandatory for the first 9 years. Municipal governments undertake the cost of acquiring musical instruments for each individual child. It is no wonder then that the Sweden or Swedish nationals have established themselves in various aspects of the industry all over the world. We intend, or we should be doing the same. Musical education opens additional neural pathways in the brain for more creative and intelligent citizenry, even for those who will not turn the study of music or musical instruments into a career. Mandatory musical programs should be returned. Most of us have relegated the study of the arts into either an optional one or an elective where you learn it for something like 1 quarter for the entire school year, sharing that same time slot with sports and health programs and history. The development, this is intended to be a developing project. It cannot be undertaken in 1 year. Let's not kid ourselves, but it should be begun. First, we have to acknowledge that we seem to be succeeding despite the lack of policies, despite the lack of government support, despite the fact that we ourselves consider music as something frivolous. It's not. We cannot ignore the studies with regards to neurological developments and the development of various intelligences and its relationship to the study of music. Not only does music correlate to creativity, but it correlates to math. And artistic people also need venues to perform or to display works, audiences to appreciate or consume their goods. Thus, we will be directing we are encouraging local governments to provide performing arts venues and spaces for sale of creative work. By venues, we mean places where people can be seen and heard. And a lot of our energies are directed towards online performances, which was necessary during the pandemic. But still, face-to-face performances are not to be ignored. The NCCA and the National Library can be directed to collaborate on providing internet-based broadcasts of original and new musical work. In Northern Europe, the practice has been established of their national libraries becoming repositories of new artistic work, such as, but not limited to, musical compositions. So with a depository, as well as a venue for performance, meaning their national libraries broadcast these new musical works, either so that they can be advertised to be picked up by producers or to be directly consumed by their audiences. This will provide an outlet for composers in search of audiences and investors while providing documentation necessary for the protection of their copyrights. Furthermore, in mandatory arts programs such as appreciation of our various classical and artistic works should be strongly encouraged to create local consumers and patrons of our artists. Again, if we don't study our own artists, we will never develop an audience for them. They will be relegated to being studied by academics, nothing wrong with that, but the study of academics do not provide the financial reward that our artists so greatly deserve. Such programs can be replicated by LGUs for adults and seniors for continuing education and development. Most of our education, we always consider that it is the young that should be taught. But let us not forget that continuing education for adults should also be open, particularly in the creative industries. In all the foregoing activities, incentives can be provided for partnerships with the private sector. For example, the mandates for corporate social responsibility can be tied up with the extra work or extra activities that school children can undertake in order to develop their artistic talents. The NCCA could be directed to work with the Department of Finance in expanding the fundraising capability of the NEFCA. This is often unexplored. The National Endowment Fund for Culture and Arts is not just a fund that we grow, but we grow through organically, meaning we earn from the interest of the seed money provided by PAGCOR, but it is also allowed by law to accept donations and to raise funds to increase the capability of the National Endowment Fund. And utilize also fully its tax and duty exemptions in sourcing materials for the creation of artwork, restoration, and conservation. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Tricky, for such an enlightening statement on the need to humanize our educational programs. Dr. De Vera, would you like to comment, or we will continue? Yeah. Okay. Before we request Director Gayona to make his statement, we will now ask Dr. Taduran to make his own reaction or statements. He is also part of the University of the Philippines group that's handling arts and anthropology.
Hi. Slides, please.
Yes, please.
So yeah, I prepared some slide, pero I think ako yung magtatahi ng lahat. So bakit related ang education sa culture and the arts? So medyo lecture-y yung dating nito, so please bear with me.
Mahaba ba to?
No, not really. Madali lang.
Yes.
So yeah, so I'm a biological and forensic anthropologist. So anthropology is the study of man, and it views us both biological and cultural beings. So sa anthropology, we emphasize a holistic, comparative approach encompassing all people at all times. And like what I previously mentioned, humans are biocultural. That's because biology shapes culture and culture shapes biology. Humans are organisms and persons at the same time. Pero ano bang ibig sabihin nun? When we talk about yung pag-organisms, organisms are constituted within nature, and characteristics are encoded in the genes. We tackle topics such as evolution, heredity, anatomy, and development. So basically, anong namana mo sa magulang mo or ninuno mo, yan yung part na pagiging organism ng isang tao. Meanwhile, yung persons naman, it's constituted within culture. Humans are programmed to learn from their environment, previous experiences, and from other people. Anong natutunan mo sa nanay mo or sa kaibigan or sa palabas na pinanood mo? This is why when we talk about humans, we talk about the physical and behavioral, the biological and the cultural, because humans are formed by nature and nurture. Actually, ito yung slide na laging sinisimulan ko when I teach biological anthropology. These are the 6 unique characteristics of humans. And the first 2 are biological adaptations, and the rest are behavioral. The behaviors that are unique to humans, speech, tool use, and dependence on culture, are also related to the fact that humans are very smart. Our brains are bigger and have more complex analytical skills than the brains of both other primates and animals in general. So these biological advantages enable us to figure out complex problems, including how to survive in a wide range of environments. And humans have the capacity to learn from other humans, enabling accumulation of knowledge across many generations. In short, humans are culture dependent for survival. So, pinag-usapan po natin to, what is culture? Ito po yung classic definition ng culture. Culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by a man as a member of society. Ito yung classic definition ng culture. To understand further, I'm going to discuss a few of the characteristics of culture, citing examples from Filipino culture. Culture is learned. Yan yung pinaka-importante sa lahat. People create, remember, and deal with ideas. They grasp and apply specific systems of symbolic meaning. The most interesting and significant cultural forces are those that affect people every day of their lives, particularly those that influence children during enculturation. A good example would be yung pagmamano. One can learn that from from parents, from friends, or pwede actually kahit sa palabas. Next, culture is shared. Culture is an attribute not of individuals per se, but of individuals as members of group. Culture is transmitted in society. Shared beliefs, values, memories, and expectations link people who grow up in the same culture. This is why education is very important, because education is basically enculturation. Enculturation unifies people by providing us with common experiences. Enculturation is the process by which a child learns his or her culture. Culture is integrated then. If one part of the system changes, other parts change as well. Napanood ko yung first episode nitong Experts Forum. Ang sabi ni Professor Carlos na kailangan palitan talaga yung government para magkaroon ng actually marirelate nyo to dito. Pag nagpalit yung government, magpapalit din yung magkakaroon din ng yes. So, anong importance or anong kinalaman ng culture sa identity? Culture is very essential to identity because culture influences our beliefs about what is true and false, our attitudes including our likes and dislikes, our values regarding what is right and wrong, and our behaviors. It is from these cultural influences that our identities are formed. So meron tayong tinatawag na culture as an iceberg. As you can but when we talk about Filipino culture, usually yung mga characteristics na sinasabi is hospitality, hiya, kapwa, bahala na, paggalang, pamilya. But when we look at this, parang nandun siya sa may ilalim lahat. Medyo mahina tayo dun sa visible cultural expressions. Kaya I do support yung sinasabi ni Attorney Trixie kanina. Music is one form of cultural expression na kailangan natin. So the question is, how do we preserve or exhibit them? Yung culture, basically, maybe in stories or books, in CDs, hindi pala CDs, Spotify na pala. Also in paintings or films or other visual media. So when we talk about culture, syempre related din yung memory, the association of collective memory with culture and group identification over time produces cultural identity that preserves events. So they are handed down from generation to generation, perhaps reconstructed by sharing communication. And not only does a cultural memory differ significantly from history and historical consciousness, but it also depends heavily on the ability of cultural institutions as mediating structures that collect the texts, sound recordings, photographs, and other figures of memory reflecting the diversity of community and cultural life. So, living and collective memories of diverse communities are validated through the acts of preservation and access, not only to books and other textual materials, but also to stories, oral histories, musical and dance performances, art, and many other forms of expression. So dito po papasok yung libraries, archives, and museums as very important because they have the potential to be strong cultural mediators in a society like our society that is fragmented. People use their culture actively and creatively rather than blindly following its dictates. Humans aren't passive beings who are doomed to follow their cultural traditions like programmed robots. Culture is contested then. Different groups in society, they usually struggle with one another over whose ideas, values, goals, and beliefs will prevail. That's why we have elections, actually. Yeah, so very important din ang culture change na pag-uusapan. In fact, right now, I think we're experiencing globalization, which is basically the accelerating interdependence of nations in the world system. And very important din yung independent invention. This is basically a development of a cultural feature in different societies. And faced with comparable problems and challenges, people in different societies have innovated and changed in similar ways. So para saan ba lahat ito? Well, basically, when we are enculturated, this culture is embodied. Our brain and our nervous system are our most cultural organs. The worlds we have built as families, culture, societies, and civilizations affect the nervous system that each of our bodies build during development. Kaya po very important ang child rearing at saka education sa pagkabata, lalo na kasi on one hand, nagde-develop yung utak, and on the other hand, natututo ang isang bata. And then finally, dadagdag ko lang doon sa mga sinabi ni Chair Popoy at saka ni Attorney Trixie. I support. I hope that the next government would facilitate continuous learning. Humans are among the slowest developing primates, and we have the capacity to learn. Actually, because of neuroplasticity. I hope the next government would strengthen the National Library, National Museum, and National Historical Commission. I hope there will be more support for artists, musical artists, visual artists, kahit yung mga computer, basta yung mga artists na gamit ng computer, hindi ko alam kung anong tawag doon. Animation yata. More research on language, culture, and society specifically. And more scientific research with real-life impact. I do believe marami tayong baseline data na hindi pa natin alam. Like for example, average height ng Filipinos. We don't really know kung ano talagang average height ng mga Filipinos. Yeah. And then, of course, increased connectivity dahil nga yung hybrid learning would be the new normal. I do hope yung Philippine High School for the Arts na nag-iisa lang sa Makiling, I do hope magkakaroon ng bawat region. And I do hope magkaroon din ng Pisay University para tuloy-tuloy na sa higher sciences yung mga students from the Philippine Science High School. And finally, Department of Culture. I think we badly need that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Taduran. Marami siguro nagtataka dito sa ginawa natin na pagmimix ng very hard aspects of our educational system, and of course the soft aspect, as I mentioned earlier. But this is very, very critical because these two are already not only going to balance our younger generation, and even the older generation, insofar as identities and all of these nation-building efforts are concerned, but also because of the economic power of cultural activities. If you remember in Korea, in South Korea, yung BTS nila, etc., Korean telenovela and everything else, these are powerful billion-dollar activities. And it involves a lot of skills, it involves a lot of higher learning, it involves a lot of educational efforts, cultural. Also, the number one, aside from IKEA, my understanding is that one of the biggest industries of Sweden, for example, aside from IKEA, one of the big, is ABA, yung the cultural group. So malaking bagay po ito na ma-maintain natin, maayos natin na mabuti, and I hope the Commission on Higher Education together with the other institutions in this tripolar educational system will now try to imbue the cultural aspect of our education and training. Kasi nawala din yan eh. Originally, there was a Department of Education, Culture, Sports, and the Arts. Pinaghati-hati lahat yan into the different agencies. So before we ask Dr. De Vera for his comments, we will now request Dr. Gaspar Gayona to make a few statements regarding our topic for today. Dr. Gayona.
Good morning, and thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
And thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I agree on the emphasis on the comprehensive review of the K-12 program, because instead of loosening the curriculum, it even became tighter because of so many subjects. No? Maybe the whole education sector, both DepEd, TESTA, and CHED, has to ask themselves what kind of graduates do they really envision from their own sector, from their own level. I'll attach this to the discussion on culture because I used to sit as the chair of the BIMT Socio-Cultural Education Cluster. Even ASEAN is also the same cluster. They do not separate one from the other, and because of the significance of culture and the education combined together. So it's not just the readiness to go to the university, but maybe a question of what kind of citizens do we want to produce from younger minds and hearts going up to the higher level of education. And since a lot of points that I would like to mention here has been discussed by Dr. Spirit already, I just want to emphasize Dr. De Vera's point on ETIAP. I agree. We have to strengthen this because we have the Philippine Qualifications Framework. I think we have to anchor ETIAP in the Philippine Qualifications Framework. And then, of course, the recognition of prior learning, because while there is a mention of OFWs going back to school, do they need to go to school or do they need just to be recognized based on their experiences and learning in whatever they are working? We have a lot of dropouts. What's the reason why they are dropping out? Most especially in the rural areas, do they need to go to training? Do they need to go to education? Or can we just design a program where their competencies can be credentialed or recognized? Like the farmers, they have been living as farmers working on it. There is a good model in Germany on the recognition of prior learning by using competency cards, even for those who cannot read. And so I think one of the point that needs to be emphasized is already integrated learning. Like, yeah, we have discussed quite long the significance of culture. What's the relationship of English subject with culture, with deepening the young learners' attitude, behaviors towards their culture? Do they understand it? Rather than look at the subject as fragmented subjects not related to each other. I think we have to look into that also. So again, I agree on strengthening of research. I think you have noticed also that our young people today needs to have critical thinking, and research is one of the pathways to improve the critical thinking of our learners. A lot of them are just doing things that they do not even ask themselves what will be the consequence of this, what will be the result to others, what will be the result to the society. They read something, they believe in it without even analysis. No? And research could be one of the pathways to improve the critical thinking prowess of our learners. Even entrepreneurship requires critical thinking. In that regard, I also would like to, with the entry of the use of technology and the entry of the different modalities of learning and delivery, I would like also to ask, how do the institutions create the environment where the learners can manage their own learning? There are a lot of literatures already in the internet, not like before. There are even published books that are already in the ordinary explorer of the internet.
Dr. Gayon, are you going to ask that of Dr. De Vera? How are you going to do that? You want him to answer?
Yeah. And on the skilled workforce, one of the reasons pointed out by the studies of mismatch is that there are highly educated but underskilled, or highly skilled but undereducated. So this is where the relationship between TVET and higher ed must be strengthened. We have started this already, no? But the task force or the working group has to sit down together and get serious into this. Combine APIA, recognition of prior learning, and lifelong learning pathways. And then, of course, how do we integrate skills and academics in one pathway in the format of the Philippine Qualifications Framework? And this is where trifocalization has a significance. Dr. De Vera emphasized the reforms that have been done by higher education. TESDA has done a lot of reforms.
I
EPED
think
has
that's
to do a lot of reforms. No, and in that regard, combining them together again would be, well, put it into big question mark to go back into behemoth agency where one sector would be again second rated
yeah.
from the others.
Thank you.
So those are the things I'd like to emphasize.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gayon. Actually, the issue of mismatch is a continuing concern, not only in the Philippines but in almost all other countries. So, before we wrap up, because our director has already advised us to wrap up, we will request our editor-in-chief of the Business Mirror to ask a few questions of our presenter and our reactors.
Okay, I have a question for Chairman De Vera. Sir, you cited the need for affirmative action in the effort to improve participation in higher ed, especially in the SOCs. How do we balance the goals of having a more inclusive approach to education so as to fold in the newly marginalized, the rebel returnees children, etc., with the goal of ensuring that quality is maintained?
Okay. There is an assumption that if students are poorly trained to go to university, that they will not perform well as students. That has always been the bias. Sabi nila, pag mahina na yung preparation sa high school, wala nang pag-asa yan sa kwan. The studies all over the world do not bear that out. In fact, all the studies in the world show that in the proper learning environment of a university, it only takes 2 years for a student to catch up with his age cohort as far as developing the necessary competencies concerned. 2 years lang ang kailangan. And that this has been comparative studies across countries. So what do you do? First, you help them get into the university because the barrier is the admission test. The admission process. The admission test is biased in favor of students who are better prepared to take the exam. Richer students, like UPCAT, you know, a very distorted system, no? Oh, mga taga-UP, no? If you have another program, Jonat, I can discuss that because ang daming problema ng admission ng UP. So, the first barrier is you help them get into the university. Second, you create the environment for them to learn well. And number 3, you give them subsidy so that they can continue their schooling. So yung pre-higher ed, nandoon na yung subsidy. Libre na yung tuition at miscellaneous fees, may subsidy ka pa kung mahirap ka. Because all the studies show, the number 1 reason why students drop out, wala silang pambayad ng tuition. Ang number 2, wala silang panggastos araw-araw. Yung free higher ed already corrects that. Now, it is the admission system now that is the barrier for a lot of students. That's why you need affirmative action.
Dr. Rivera, thank you very much. There are 2 other things that ang daming nagtatanong dito, may mga nagtatanong dito sa atin, hindi ko na sila dalawa yung kanilang gustong tanungin. Number 1, yung issue nga tungkol dito sa paano natin aayusin yung balance between private educational requirements and the public educational system kasi that has always been the issue. Pagdating sa higher education, and you have already discussed this earlier, we are expanding our public university system. But at the same time, we cannot afford to have the private educational system go under. Yan ang isang issue dyan. That also correlates with the proliferation of locally funded, meaning local government-funded universities and colleges. It's as if parang parang hot pandesal. Lahat ng mga local government gusto nila magkaroon din ng kanilang sariling mga universities or colleges. Paano nyo inaayos to ngayon? And then relate that please to the issue of quality education.
Okay, number one, there should just be one standard of quality for all types of universities. Public, private, local, or national. We have to be very strict in quality assurance. Ibig sabihin, kung yung program masama, ipasa na. Kung mahina yung eskwelahan, huwag payagang mag-offer ng program. That should be non-negotiable across all levels. We demand from private schools, we should demand from private, public, and local. Okay, it's number one. Number two, we must target the private schools that need help. They are the smaller private schools in the provinces.
Missionary, parang
Hindi competitive yung rates nila versus state universities Pupunta yung estudyante, pati teacher nila, lumilipat sa public universities kasi mas mataas ang sweldo. Yun dapat ang tulungan yung smaller private schools. The big private schools, they can take care of themselves. They have a lot of resources. They have a lot of sources of income. They don't need to be assisted. But it is the smaller that can be done. No? Ang surprising sa free higher ed, yung tertiary education subsidy, akala noon, mga public lang ang makikinabang. Out of the 500,000 test beneficiaries, majority go to private universities. So actually, private university students are being assisted. But I would agree, yung small private schools, government should help them get interconnected. We should give them assistance so they can become smart universities so that they can compete with the public universities.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. De Vera. Yung sa mismatch, how do you address that? Are you working with the job market institutions, whether local or overseas?
Kasi bago na ang curriculum in all degree programs because of K-12. So all the degree programs have a new curriculum. What we have done in CHED is to change the technical panel in all degree programs. The technical panel is the one that works on the curriculum. We now require equal representation of industry, government, and academe. Dati kasi yung technical panel galing lahat sa academe yan. Kaya nagagalit yung industry. Wala yung skills na kailangan lang. So industry is already there. Number one. Number two, DOLE, DTI, CHED is now working together on what does the market require. For example, yung aming merit scholarships, yung based on grades, ang binibigyan lang ng scholarships on the priority programs identified jointly by DOLE, DTI, and CHED. Pero yung mismatch kasi, hindi mo masosolve kagad yan in one or two administrations. The problem is, the world changes so fast that in university now, you don't know how the job market will look like when the students graduate. And you need 4 years for the student to graduate. By that time, yung manpower requirements all over the world nagpapalit na. You must be able to anticipate and project how the job market looks like to be able to change curriculum. But curriculum reform is not very easy to do because it takes 4 years before you produce a graduate.
Okay. The other question, ito na naman, yung internationalization daw of education. Are we prepared or are we preparing for that? Meaning, ang dami na pumapasok dito na big universities, mga noted universities from other countries. Are we trying to integrate them into our system, get them to work with us, or how are we working in the international community?
The universities that are talking or want to go to the Philippines want to partner with Philippine universities. MMSU in Ilocos Norte, University of Arizona is setting up a micro campus in MMSU. University of Nagoya already has a branch campus in UP Los Baños. They want to work with Philippine universities. Hindi naman stand-alone yung pagpunta nila. That is because they recognize that there are very good Philippine universities they can work with. 10 Philippine universities and 8 UK universities have developed joint master's and PhD programs already. So you can get a UK degree while studying in the Philippines. So it is the partnership between the universities that is emerging. Not so much foreign universities coming here and taking away the students of Philippine universities. That's not happening. They want to work with Philippine universities.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, si Ms. Joyce Cartin, former Deputy Director General of TESDA, would like to ask.
May 3 puntos lang ako na pwede i-take up. Una-una kanina, sinabi yung trifocalization will have to be reviewed. Kasi nung ginawa yung mga batas na yan, merong element doon na tinawag nila Educational Council, Coordinating Council, na hanggang ngayon hindi naman naging effective. And I'd like to get the view of Dr. De Vera on this, kasi that's supposed to synchronize and put direction to our Human Capital Development Direction. Pangalawa, sinabi kanina na masyadong mabilis ang pagpalit ng labor market. Now, considering na this is a reality, ano ang intervention from the government side? Because we have to put some kind of a strategic direction sa ating human capital development programs. Gaya ng halimbawa, example lang, no? We spend billions of pesos sa scholarship program under TESDA. Pero tingnan nyo naman kung ano ang direksyon yan. Nagbibigay lang ng programa sapagkat may subsidies from government, pero it is leading to no strategic direction in relation to our development directions. In some countries, I recall, sa US ata, meron sila tinatawag na Secretary Commission to assess needs. Baka ito ay ilalagay na natin as a part of the government institution na wala nang gagawin. Imomonitor ang international at domestic labor market changes para naman mabigyan ng direksyon yung pera na binibigay natin sa human capital development. And this is very strategic because otherwise maiwanan tayo in this new international competitive market. Dr. De Vera?
Number 1, siguro sa dami ng ginagawa ng mga agencies, kulang na yung oras para magkita-kita sila. Just for DepEd, just resolving the classroom crisis. Already takes up all your time figuring out what to do it. Maybe we have to imagine better ways for the 3 agencies to meet and regularly talk to each other. How that would look like, I have no idea right now, but we have to do it. Number 2, how do you predict the market abroad? I would agree. May projection na ginagawa ang DOLE, meron ng DTI, Board of Investments, etc. We need to put this together, better identification of niches. I just came from Canada. Alam mo sa Canada, ang hinahanap nila, agricultural workers at saka auto mechanics. Humihingi yung consulate sa Canada ng tulong ng CHED kung paano gagawin ito. We also need our foreign posts to be able to have better predictive capacity of the emerging markets across the different countries. Dapat pinagsasama-sama yan. So, kailangan mag-usap sila. No? For example, WCC in Pangasinan just signed a memorandum of agreement with British Columbia Institute of Technology on avionics and aircraft maintenance. How did that happen? Because I went to British Columbia and I saw how good BCIT is. They could repair aircraft from small to commercial. In the Philippines, we cannot repair commercial aircraft. So what did I do? I forced them to meet together. They now have a MOA to have a joint degree program. Kailangan medyo aggressive yung pag-predict. Sino ang nagsabi sa akin nung ganon? Yung Consul General natin sa Vancouver. Hindi galing sa DOLE, galing sa DFA. No? So, kailangan mag-usap-usap yung government agencies doon sa pag-predict ng labor market kasi masyadong mabilis magpalit din in many countries. Do you know, Jonat, yung bee industry ng Canada. Ang nagpapatakbo mga Pilipino. They work on a 6-month contract. Pagka winter, nauwi na sila sa Pilipinas. Pag summer, balik ulit sila. The honey, the production of honey in California is being done by Filipino farmers. So may mga niche na gano'n na pwede, kailangan we have to do a better job identifying it.
Finally, mayroon pa nagtanong dito yung tungkol return of service program kasi marami daw sige, kukuha ko dyan ng pagiging ganito. Pero ang aking objective talaga, magmamigrate ako sa Canada o sa Amerika. Paano ba natin inaayos ito?
Hindi ako worried about migration. I don't worry about what they call brain drain. Para sa akin, brain circulation. I have no problem with Filipinos practicing their profession overseas because they will always remain Filipinos. Magpapadala pa rin ng balikbayan box yan. Magbibigay pa rin ng remittance. I think the challenge is, for all the nurses that want to practice abroad, how do we produce more nurses that are very competent so that the needs of the domestic needs are not compromised because of foreign needs? Yung mga Pilipino naman, magagaling talaga pag nagpunta abroad. We should allow them to practice their profession.
Okay. Trixie.
Meron tayong very little known program called the Centro Rizal. Nakalimutan yata yung Centro. Yung Centro Rizal is the creation of, Philippine cultural centers, where actually they're repositories of materials and other form of media. Most of them are located in Philippine embassies. Ang purpose nito is to teach yung mga first generation. Pinoy pa rin sila but born and raised in other countries. So the acculturation continues. So we still become Pinoy. So yung issues about brain drain or yung nag-immigrate yung ating mga Pinoy doesn't become such a big issue anymore because they're still Pinoys and we can still reach out to them through the Centro Rizal. It's very, parang almost esoteric yung knowledge tungkol dito, but it is an established program and it has a regular budget.
Maganda yan because actually the exchanges will be really be very, very instructive for all of us and educational for all of us kasi iba yung mga exchange ng knowledge and everything else ng mga nandoon, pumupunta dito. As a matter of fact, there was a program aside from the Balikbayan program before na yung mga summer camps for Filipinos born in the US or Canada or elsewhere to come to the Philippines and nagkakaroon ng mga exchanges na ganon. Is the exchange program part of our efforts, Dr. De Vera?
Yes. In fact, I just came from Canada. Yung emerging agreements between Philippine and Canadian universities includes yung spend a semester abroad. Both sides. Canadians spending 1 semester na Philippine university, Filipino students spending 1 semester in a Canadian university. Both sides are excited on that. Kasi maraming gustong magpunta sa Pilipinas ng mga, the Philippines is now the #1 migrant population annually in Canada for the past 5 years. Hindi na Indians. So there's a very big Filipino community there. Many of them want their children not to lose their roots from their home country. They're very interested to send them there on a short program to study, to visit, etc. So that's now part of most of the agreements between universities.
Thank you very much, Dr. De Vera. Before we end our session, we will now request Dr. De Vera to come out with his final closing statement.
Thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me. I just hope that the candidates running for public office, especially the presidents, vice presidents, the senators, would really find time to discuss further education issues. One of my frustrations in this campaign is, the issues on education are not being tackled seriously. And yet, as Chief Espisode said, the best investment in the future is really in education. That is where government should do. So the candidates should take up their position on the issues we are taking up. Madaming kailangang pag-usapan. I am concerned that what is being bandied around in media is an education crisis. Actually, hindi ko alam kung saan galing yung crisis na yun, tsaka paano na-define, at tsaka ano yung metrics nito. Kasi sa higher ed, wala kaming crisis sa higher ed. Participation rates are going up, internationalization rates are going up. What we need is a sober discussion of the education issues and commit the candidates to the reforms that are needed in education.
Thank you, Dr. De Vera, before we go to TikTok or everything else. But anyway, thank you very much, Dr. De Vera. Thank you very much, Dr. Espiritu. Thank you very much, Attorney Trixie Cruz Angeles, and Dr. Taduran and Dr. Gayuna for joining us in this morning's session, the fifth in our series of webinars on various topics affecting the country, and which we hope the elected officials in the next administration, whether from the president down to the councilors, will be able to imbibe many of the lessons as well as the suggestions coming out of these webinar sessions. So maraming salamat po. Sa susunod po, ulit dito sa ating webinar activity. Good morning po sa inyong lahat.
Morning. Thank you. Thank you very much.